I never thought peace could sound like the hum of my old coffee maker. That quiet Tuesday morning in Fayetteville, the sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting dappled patterns across my kitchen table. The only thought occupying my mind was whether I'd bake cornbread or blueberry muffins for the ladies' book club that afternoon. At 71, I'd finally found my rhythm in this brick house with the faded green shutters, a home that had taken 40 years of backbreaking work to call truly mine, earned steady and still. The coffee dripped into my favorite ceramic mug, the one with tiny violets that Walter had given me on our 30th anniversary, just 3 months before the cancer took him. I breathed in the familiar aroma, letting the steam warm my face. The house creaked softly, its aged timber frame shifting in the morning sun, speaking to me in a language we'd developed over decades. Today marked 5 years since I'd made the final mortgage payment. 5 years of true ownership after a lifetime of service to others. The front door hinges groaned without warning. No knock, no call, just the sudden intrusion of outside air. Jacob didn't knock anymore, hadn't since he was a teenager. At 41, my son still walked into my home as if the years hadn't taught him that grown men should respect closed doors. He stood in my kitchen doorway, tall and restless as always, smelling faintly of motor oil and arrogance. His keys dangled from his fingers before landing with a sharp clatter on my polished countertop. "Mom," he announced, his voice filling the quiet kitchen like an unwelcome radio. "We've made a decision." I froze mid-pour, the stream of coffee splashing into my cup, tiny droplets speckling the counter. We. That word always meant trouble. The collective pronoun that excluded me while demanding something of me. Melissa and I talked, he continued, running his hand through his thinning hair. "The kids, her mom, all of us. We're moving in here next week. It's just temporary until we find something bigger. You'll thank us later. It's not good for you to live alone at your age." I stared at him, still holding the coffee pot, the steam rising between us like a thin curtain of disbelief. His words hung in the air, solid and immovable. "You're moving in?" "Yeah, it's decided," he said casually, as if announcing the weather forecast. "Melissa's mom can't be alone anymore, and the kids need space. You've got plenty of it. You don't need all these rooms." He began walking around my kitchen, gesturing toward the hallway, already dividing my home like a landlord marking territory. "The kids can have the sewing room. Melissa and I will take your old guest room. Hazel can have the den. It's closer to the bathroom anyway." Every word was a nail in my chest. He spoke as though I wasn't standing there, as though 40 years of scrubbing hotel floors and mopping library halls to pay for this house didn't matter. As though my existence had become inconsequential, a footnote in their plans. "Jacob," I said, keeping my voice steady but soft. "This is my home. I bought it. I pay the bills." He laughed. A sharp, condescending laugh that sliced through the quiet like a blade. "Come on, Mom. Don't be dramatic. It'll be good for you. You won't be lonely anymore. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word burned more than anything else. He didn't see the way my hands tightened around the coffee pot, or the way my breath trembled. He didn't notice the small portrait of his late father hanging on the wall behind him. Walter, who had taught me never to let anyone take what I'd worked for. Walter, who would have never allowed our son to speak to me this way. "Saturday," Jacob said, finally picking up his keys again. "The moving truck will be here. Don't worry, we'll handle everything." Then he was gone, the screen door slapping shut behind him. I stood there in the kitchen, the smell of burnt coffee rising as the pot hissed on the warmer. The house was silent again, but it didn't feel peaceful anymore. I set down the pot, wiped my hands on my apron, and whispered to the empty room. "Not this time, Jacob. Not this house." Something inside me shifted, a small, fierce spark I hadn't felt in years. The spark of a woman who was done being told what to do. That night I couldn't sleep. The ceiling fan turned slowly above me, pushing warm Arkansas air around the room, but it did nothing to quiet my thoughts. Every creak of the house reminded me of what Jacob had said. "It's decided." The words echoed like an order, not a request. I turned on my bedside lamp and stared at the framed photo on the nightstand. It was taken the year I finally paid off the mortgage. Me standing in front of this very house with the key in my hand, smiling like a woman who'd just outrun a storm. That house wasn't just wood and brick. It was my spine, my story, the proof that every late shift and every blister on my hands had meant something. And now my own son wanted to take it from me, not with violence, but with entitlement. The moonlight streamed through my window, casting long shadows across the quilt that had belonged to my grandmother. I traced the stitches with my fingertips, remembering how my hands had trembled the day Walter's doctor had given us the news. 6 months, maybe less. I'd held myself together then, just as I'd done after losing him. Just as I'd done when raising Jacob alone, working 2 jobs, making sure he never felt the poverty that had dogged my own childhood. This wasn't new. Jacob had always had a way of deciding for me where I'd babysit, what bills I'd cover, which of his mistakes I'd quietly pay for so the family wouldn't talk. When his marriage fell apart 5 years ago, I let him move in for a few weeks. He stayed 18 months, left the place in chaos, and not once said thank you. Back then, I told myself that was what mothers did. But now at 71, with a heart that had finally stopped apologizing for beating, I knew better. I sat up the sheet, sliding off my legs, and said aloud to no one, "He's not doing this again." I made myself a cup of warm milk and sat by the kitchen window. Outside, the pine trees swayed under the moonlight, whispering like they were daring me to take my life back. Somewhere deep inside the quiet voice of my late husband rose up from memory, "Maggie, you spent your life cleaning up after others. When will you keep something clean just for yourself?" The clock struck midnight, and I picked up the phone. My hands didn't shake. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Evelyn Harper's name, my oldest friend, the only one who told me the truth. She used to work in real estate before retiring, and she had that sharp sense that saw through people's motives like glass. The phone rang twice before her sleepy voice answered. "Maggie, is everything okay?" "No," I said, steady and clear. "I need your help. Tomorrow morning early." There was a pause. Then her tone shifted, alert, serious. "What happened? My son decided he's moving into my house," I replied, the bitterness slipping into my voice. "But he forgot to ask the owner." Evelyn exhaled slowly, understanding immediately. "All right, honey, I'll bring the coffee. We'll talk at Millie's Cafe at 9. And don't you worry. I've seen men like him lose their grip before." When I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Calm. Not the kind that comes from silence, but the kind that comes from decision. I turned off the lamp, walked back to bed, and smiled faintly in the dark. Jacob thought I was weak because I was old. But what he didn't know was that women my age don't fight with fists anymore. We fight with plans. Millie's Cafe was already half full when I arrived the next morning. The place smelled of biscuits, bacon grease, and hope, the kind of hope that only old friends can bring. Evelyn waved from the corner booth, her silver hair pinned neatly, a folder already waiting on the table beside her coffee. She had always been the kind of woman who came prepared for anything, even at 9 in the morning. "Maggie," she said, standing to hug me. "You sounded like a woman ready to start a revolution." "Maybe I am," I replied, sliding into the booth. "I just didn't expect it to be against my own son." We talked for nearly an hour. I told her everything: Jacob's arrogance, Melissa's fake sweetness, the way they treated my house like a retirement home they could occupy without rent or permission. Evelyn didn't interrupt. She listened, her eyes narrowing, her fingers tapping lightly against the folder. When I finished, she leaned closer. "You remember what I used to tell my clients?" "What's that?" "Never wait until they take your name off the mailbox to realize you've lost your home." She opened the folder. Inside were property assessment sheets, blank sale forms, and contact details for a local lawyer named Nolan Reeves, someone she'd trusted for years. "You can still make your own moves," she said quietly. "Before Saturday." The thought sent a chill through me. Selling the house felt drastic, but the idea of being pushed out of it under their rules was worse. "You think I should sell?" I asked softly. "I think you should protect yourself," Evelyn replied, sliding the folder closer to me. "At least know your options. What's your house worth, Maggie?" "Have you looked at the market lately?" I shook my head. I hadn't thought about the market value since paying off the mortgage 5 years ago. "It's a seller's market right now," she continued. "Your neighborhood has appreciated considerably. 3 bedrooms, established yard, original hardwood floors. You could walk away with enough to buy something smaller, maybe in Eureka Springs, and still have a nest egg." Eureka Springs. The name conjured images of Victorian homes nestled in the Ozark Mountains art galleries and quiet streets. It was only an hour's drive from Fayetteville, close enough to still see friends, but far enough to start fresh. "I've always loved it there," I admitted, a small flutter of possibility awakening in my chest. Evelyn smiled, recognizing the spark in my eyes. "Let's just explore the options," she suggested. "No commitment. We can talk to Nolan, get your house appraised, see what's available in Eureka Springs. Then you decide." By the time we left the cafe, something had shifted inside me. The fear and anger had hardened into resolve. I wasn't just reacting to Jacob's presumption anymore, I was choosing my own path. That afternoon, Evelyn drove me to meet with Nolan Reeves. His office was small but meticulous, lined with law books and framed diplomas. He was in his 60s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a directness I appreciated. He listened without judgment as I explained my situation. "Mrs. Collins," he said when I finished, "from a legal standpoint, the situation is quite clear. The house is solely in your name. You have every right to sell it, rent it, or continue living in it as you see fit. Your son has no claim to the property regardless of his intentions." Relief flooded through me. Validation that I wasn't overreacting. "If you decide to sell," Nolan continued, "we can move quickly. I can have the paperwork ready within days. The only question is, what do you want to do?" "I want to be free," I said, surprising myself with the simplicity and truth of the answer. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity and secrecy. Evelyn arranged for a real estate appraiser to visit when Jacob was at work. The number he gave me, $275,000, nearly took my breath away. My little brick house, purchased for $42,000 in 1982, had become a valuable asset. Meanwhile, I began researching Eureka Springs. I found several small houses with modest yards, all within my price range. One in particular caught my eye, a 2-bedroom cottage with a front porch that faced east, perfect for morning coffee. It was listed at $120,000, leaving me a substantial cushion for the future. On Thursday, Evelyn drove me to Eureka Springs to see it in person. The winding mountain road lifted us away from Fayetteville, each curve distancing me from the life where I was merely a convenience to my son. As we drove, I felt something unexpected excitement. I hadn't felt excited about anything since Walter died. The cottage was even more charming in person. Built in the 1940s, it had original cedar floors, a fireplace with a river rock surround, and a kitchen with windows that looked out onto flowering dogwoods. The real estate agent, a young woman named Tanya, showed us through each room, pointing out features with genuine enthusiasm. "It's smaller than what you have now," she acknowledged, "but it's solid. The roof was replaced just last year, and the heating system is only 5 years old. The previous owner was a retired librarian who took excellent care of the place." A librarian. That felt like a sign. I'd spent 25 years working at the Fayetteville Public Library, shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed. In retirement, I still volunteered there twice a week, reading to children during story hour. "Is there a library nearby?" I asked. 3 blocks away, Tanya replied. "They're always looking for volunteers, especially for the children's program." I walked onto the front porch and looked out at the tree-lined street. Neighbors were tending gardens, walking dogs, living their lives in peaceful coexistence. I could see myself here reading on the porch, planting flowers along the walkway, making new friends who chose my company rather than seeing me as an obligation. "What do you think?" Evelyn asked, joining me on the porch. "I think I could be happy here," I admitted. Back in Fayetteville, I met again with Nolan. There were papers to sign, decisions to make. I decided to list my house immediately, accepting that I might need to take less than the appraised value for a quick sale. Time was critical. Jacob's Saturday deadline loomed. Friday morning, a miracle happened. A young nurse named Dana Hargrove viewed my house at 9 a.m. By noon, she'd made a full-price offer with a request for immediate occupancy. She'd inherited money from her grandmother and had been searching for months for the right house in my neighborhood close to the hospital where she worked. "It's perfect for me," she said, her eyes bright with the same hope I'd felt when Walter and I first viewed the house 40 years ago. "I've been living in an apartment with paper-thin walls. This is exactly what I've been saving for." I signed the acceptance papers that afternoon. Nolan expedited everything, calling in favors to get the title search completed overnight. The closing was set for Saturday morning, the very day Jacob planned to move in. That evening, I wrote Jacob a brief note, leaving it on the kitchen table where he'd see it when he inevitably let himself in. "Jacob, this will be my last week here." "Mom," I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. Those 4 words said everything that needed saying. I slept soundly that night for the first time in days. The weight that had pressed on my chest since Jacob's announcement had lifted. In its place was a strange light feeling, like standing at the edge of a high place, terrified yet exhilarated by the view. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear. I woke early, made coffee, and packed my overnight bag. Most of my belongings would stay with the house for now, part of the agreement with Dana, who needed furniture. Evelyn and I had arranged for a storage unit for my personal items until I could move into the Eureka Springs cottage the following week. I dressed carefully in my best blue dress, the one I usually saved for church, and a strand of pearls Walter had given me for our 25th anniversary. If I was going to face down my son, I would do it with dignity. At precisely 8:30 a.m., Evelyn's car pulled into my driveway. She wasn't alone. Nolan Reeves sat in the passenger seat, his briefcase on his lap. Dana Hargrove followed in her silver sedan, parking behind them. I stepped onto the porch, overnight bag in hand, just as Jacob's truck turned onto my street. I could see Melissa in the passenger seat, the children in the back. Behind them was a rented moving truck driven by a friend of Jacob's. The timing couldn't have been more perfect, like a scene choreographed for maximum impact. Jacob pulled into the driveway, his face already clouding with confusion at the sight of the unfamiliar cars. He stepped out of the truck, leaving the door open behind him. "Mom, what's going on? Why is your bag packed? Where are you going?" I stood tall, feeling stronger than I had in years. The morning sun warmed my back as I faced my son. "I'm leaving Jacob. I've sold the house." His face went blank, then flushed with disbelief. "You what?" "The house has been sold," I repeated, my voice calm and steady. "The new owner takes possession today." Jacob laughed, a harsh, dismissive sound. "That's not possible. You can't sell a house that fast." "Stop joking, Mom. We've got a lot to do, so I'm not joking," I said. "This house isn't mine anymore." Before Jacob could respond, Dana stepped forward, extending her hand. "Mr. Collins, I'm Dana Hargrove, the new owner. I'm so pleased your mother agreed to sell to me. This house is exactly what I've been looking for." Jacob ignored her outstretched hand, turning back to me. "What are you talking about?" Nolan approached, opening his briefcase. "Mrs. Collins, if you're ready, we can finalize the paperwork now. The funds have been transferred to your account as agreed." Jacob stared bewildered as I followed Nolan to Evelyn's car, where he spread the closing documents on the hood. Melissa had emerged from the truck by now, pulling the children close to her sides as if to shield them from what was happening. "Mom," Jacob called, his voice rising. "You can't do this. Where will we go? What about our plans?" I signed the final document, then turned to face him. "Your plans, Jacob, not mine. You decided to move into my house without asking me. I decided to sell it. We both made choices." The movers had gotten out of the truck, standing awkwardly by the tailgate, waiting for someone to tell them what to do. Melissa whispered something to the children, who looked confused and upset. "This is crazy," Jacob insisted, stepping closer. "You're not thinking clearly. You need us. What are you going to do? Where will you live?" "I've purchased a home in Eureka Springs," I replied. "I'm moving there next week. Until then, I'll be staying with Evelyn." Jacob's face darkened with anger. "You've lost it, Mom. You're senile. You're not even fit to make these decisions." Before I could speak, Evelyn stepped forward, calm but sharp. "Careful, young man. I've known your mother for 30 years. She's in better control of her mind than anyone here." Jacob ignored her, turning to Nolan. "You can't let this happen. She's not thinking straight." Nolan cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "I assure you the sale was conducted lawfully, with full verification of Mrs. Collins' mental and legal capacity." Jacob's chest heaved as the reality began to sink in. "You just gave away our inheritance." That was when I laughed, not out of mockery, but out of the sheer absurdity of it all. "Inheritance? You think I built this house for you to claim like a prize? I built it to prove I could survive. You can inherit that lesson if you want." The children started to cry. Melissa pulled them closer, murmuring that they should get back in the car. The movers began reloading boxes without waiting for orders. As Jacob shouted and gestured, Evelyn gently touched my arm. "It's time," she whispered. I handed the house keys to Dana, who looked both nervous and sympathetic. "Take good care of her," I said softly. "She's been good to me." Jacob lunged forward, but Evelyn stepped between us. "Don't," she warned him. "Not today." He stopped, his breath, ragged eyes full of disbelief. "You'll regret this, Mom," he said finally. I met his gaze. "Maybe, but at least the regret will be mine." Then I turned and walked toward Evelyn's car. My feet were steady. My hands didn't shake. As we drove away, I glanced in the side mirror. Jacob was standing in the driveway, shouting something I couldn't hear. But I didn't need to. For the first time in decades, I didn't owe him a single answer. The house grew smaller behind us until it was just another roof among the trees. And in that shrinking image, I saw what freedom looked like, quiet, clean, and entirely mine. The first week in Evelyn's guest room felt like a peculiar blend of liberation and homelessness. Each morning I'd wake beneath unfamiliar floral sheets, momentarily disoriented before remembering the seismic shift I'd initiated. Evelyn insisted I stay as long as necessary, setting me up in a sunny room overlooking her garden. She'd cleared out half her closet, arranged my toiletries in her bathroom, and stocked the refrigerator with all my favorite foods. Her generosity both comforted and unsettled me. I'd spent decades being the one who made room for others, not the one who needed accommodations. Your independence fund has officially been established. Nolan called to confirm on Monday morning. The $275,000 from the house sale had been deposited into my account, minus the down payment I'd already made on the Eureka Springs cottage. Mrs. Collins, I'd like to recommend you meet with a financial advisor. This is a significant sum to manage. I thanked him, feeling a strange vertigo at possessing more money than I'd ever held at once. After hanging up, I sat at Evelyn's kitchen table and made calculations on a yellow legal pad, dividing the remaining $155,000 into categories: investment, emergency fund, living expenses. There was something empowering about planning my financial future without consulting anyone. No one to tell me I was being too cautious or too frivolous. The money represented more than security. It was tangible freedom. Meanwhile, my phone had begun its persistent campaign of harassment. Jacob called 17 times that first day, leaving increasingly agitated voicemails. You can't just disappear like this. Call me back. We need to talk about what you've done. Mom, this is insane. You've thrown away decades of family history. For what the children are upset. They don't understand why their grandmother would do this to them. Are you even checking these messages? Pick up the phone. I listened to each one, then deleted them methodically. Each message revealed more about Jacob than about my actions. His shock at losing control, his inability to conceive that I'd made a rational decision rather than succumbed to temporary insanity. By Tuesday, Melissa had joined the chorus, her voice soft and wounded. We're just worried about you. Jacob may have approached this wrong, but his heart was in the right place. We want what's best for you. The audacity of that presumption that they knew better than I did what was best for me hardened my resolve. I didn't return their calls. Instead, I spent the day with Evelyn at Eureka Springs, meeting with the cottage's previous owner, Martha Sullivan, who'd moved to assisted living after a stroke. At 84, confined to a wheelchair but sharp as a tack, she'd asked to meet the woman buying her home of 30 years. The cottage needs someone who'll appreciate it, Martha said as we sat in the sunlit common room of Hillcrest Senior Living. I chose you over a higher offer from a vacation rental company. I couldn't bear the thought of tourists tramping through, treating it like a hotel room. Her trust moved me deeply. I promised to honor the house's character, to tend the perennial garden she'd established, to maintain the bird feeders that attracted cardinals and finches to the backyard. The hummingbirds come in May, she continued, eyes brightening. They'll find the feeder if you hang it on the east hook by the kitchen window. They return to the same spots year after year. Like some people, I added, thinking of Jacob's automatic return to my home whenever life got complicated. Martha nodded, understanding flickering across her lined face. You're starting over. I can see it in your eyes. I did the same after Harold died. Everyone said I was too old to move to the mountains alone, but those were my best years. You'll find your rhythm. Her words settled something restless inside me. If Martha could begin again at 54, surely I could at 71. The closing on the cottage was scheduled for Friday. Evelyn, ever practical, had helped me arrange for movers to transfer my personal belongings from storage directly to Eureka Springs. The timeline was accelerated but manageable, a quick transition from one life to another, until Wednesday afternoon when the first legal threat arrived. A certified letter from Bradford & Sons law firm informed me that Jacob Collins was contesting the sale of the Fayetteville house on grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. The letter claimed I'd been emotionally manipulated into selling my home and requested an immediate psychological evaluation. Evelyn found me at the kitchen table, letter crumpled in my fist, tears of rage burning my eyes for the first time since this began. That ungrateful, arrogant boy, she muttered after reading it. Does he realize this will only drag things out, cost him money, and humiliate you both? It's not about getting the house back, I replied, understanding crystallizing. It's about punishing me for defying him. He can't stand that I made a choice he couldn't control. Nolan received a copy of the letter as well. He called immediately, his usual measured tone edged with indignation. This is harassment, Mrs. Collins. The sale has been completed, the funds transferred, the deed recorded. Your son has no legal standing whatsoever. I can respond with a strongly worded cease and desist, or we can go straight to filing for a restraining order if you prefer. I chose the cease and desist. A restraining order felt like an escalation I wasn't ready for, despite Jacob's behavior. He was still my son, and somewhere beneath the entitlement and anger was the boy who'd once curled against me during thunderstorms seeking protection. That maternal instinct, the one that had allowed Jacob to exploit my generosity for decades, was the hardest thing to overcome. Each night at Evelyn's, I battled the whispers of doubt. Had I overreacted? Should I have tried harder to reason with him? Was selling the house a disproportionate response to his presumption? Then Thursday brought a voice message that silenced those doubts permanently. "You've embarrassed us in front of everyone, Mom. Melissa's family thinks you've lost your mind. The neighbors are gossiping. My friends are asking questions. You could have just let us handle things for you, but now you've created this spectacle. I hope you're satisfied. Not one word about my feelings. Not one acknowledgement of my autonomy. Just concern about appearances and inconvenience." It was clarifying, like a window suddenly wiped clean after years of accumulated grime. I played the message for Evelyn over dinner. She set down her fork, eyes narrowing. You know what Walter would say if he heard that I shook my head, though I could almost hear my late husband's indignant huff. He'd say, "Maggie, you raised a man who never learned to see beyond the tip of his own nose." And he'd be right. Jacob has spent his entire adult life assuming your existence revolves around his needs. This is the first time you've proven otherwise, and he can't process it. She refilled my wine glass, her expression softening. "You're doing the right thing, honey. Some children only learn respect when they're shown boundaries they can't cross." Friday morning, I awoke with a sense of anticipation I hadn't felt in years. Today, I would become a homeowner again, but on entirely different terms. This purchase wasn't about providing security for a young family or establishing roots in a community where I'd spend decades. It was about creating a space that was solely mine, measured by my needs alone. The closing at Eureka Bank and Trust took less than an hour. Martha's daughter, acting as her power of attorney, signed the final papers with a warm smile. The cottage that had sheltered Martha's widowhood would now shelter mine. There was something poetic in the transfer one solitary woman passing the key to another. Afterwards, Evelyn drove me to the cottage, my cottage, for the first time as its official owner. We stood in the empty living room, sunlight streaming through the original wavy glass windows, casting rippled shadows across the cedar floors. "It's smaller than your old place," Evelyn observed, "but it suits you better. More character, less maintenance." She was right. The Fayetteville house had been practical when purchased room for a growing boy, a yard for a dog, proximity to schools and my work. This cottage, with its built-in bookshelves and reading nook beneath a bay window, reflected the woman I'd become. A woman who valued quiet afternoons with novels, who preferred the gentle bustle of a small tourist town to the expanding sprawl of Fayetteville. The movers arrived at noon, efficient men who carried box after box into the cottage, following my directions about which items went where. By evening, my bed was assembled in the main bedroom, essential kitchen items unpacked, and a few family photos arranged on the mantel. It wasn't fully settled, but it was functional. When Evelyn left to drive back to Fayetteville, promising to return with more of my things on Sunday, I experienced my first moment of true solitude in my new home. The cottage creaked and settled around me, introducing itself. Outside, the April twilight painted the Ozark Mountains in deepening purples. I made a simple dinner of scrambled eggs and toast, eating at the small kitchen table while watching chickadees visit the backyard feeder. The silence was different from the silence of my old house. This quiet contained no echoes of Jacob's teenage door slamming or memories of Walter's declining months. It was a blank acoustic canvas, waiting to be filled with whatever sounds I chose to create. I slept deeply that first night, waking to early sunlight filtering through curtains I hadn't yet hung. For a moment, I lay still, acclimating to this new beginning. Then I rose, made coffee, and carried it to the front porch. The street was quiet at 6 a.m., though lights had begun to appear in neighboring windows. A woman about my age walked a small terrier past my yard, raising her hand in greeting. "Good morning," she called. "You must be Martha's cottage's new owner." "I am. Margaret Collins, but everyone calls me Maggie." "Ellen Brewer. I'm 3 doors down the blue Victorian with the wraparound porch. Welcome to the neighborhood. If you need anything, don't hesitate to knock." Such a simple interaction, yet it filled me with optimism. Already I was being recognized not as Jacob's mother or Walter's widow, but as the owner of Martha's cottage, a newcomer welcomed on my own terms. The weekend passed in a blur of unpacking and organizing. Evelyn returned Sunday as promised, bringing another carload of my possessions and helping me arrange furniture. We hung curtains, assembled bookshelves, and arranged my collection of blue willow china in the kitchen hutch. By Sunday evening, the cottage had begun to feel like home, a sensation both familiar and entirely new. Monday morning brought a surprise. A certified letter arrived not from Jacob's lawyer, but from Nolan. He'd forwarded me a copy of his response to Bradford & Sons, a masterpiece of legal precision dismantling every claim against me. The final paragraph stood out. My client, Margaret Collins, is a sound-minded, legally competent adult who made a decision well within her rights as property owner. Any further attempts to harass her or challenge the legitimate sale of her property will be met with immediate legal action, including but not limited to a civil suit for emotional distress and the pursuit of a restraining order against Jacob Collins. I strongly advise your client to reconsider his current course of action. Attached was a psychological evaluation Nolan had proactively arranged with a respected geriatric specialist in Fayetteville, dated the day before the house sale. The doctor had found me exceptionally cognitively sharp for her age, with no signs of diminished capacity or undue influence. It was dated, signed, and notarized irrefutable evidence against Jacob's claims. I called Nolan immediately, touched by his thoroughness. This should end the legal challenges, he assured me. If not, we're well positioned to defend your decisions. That afternoon, I walked to the Eureka Springs Public Library, a charming stone building nestled between Victorian homes. Inside, I introduced myself to the head librarian, a woman in her 50s named Patricia. I was a library assistant in Fayetteville for 25 years, I explained. I've just moved here and would love to volunteer if you need help. Patricia's eyes lit up. We always need volunteers, especially experienced ones. Our children's story hour on Tuesdays and Thursdays could use another reader, and we're starting a program helping high school students with college application essays. It felt right, continuing the work I'd loved in this new setting. We arranged for me to start the following week, giving me time to finish settling into the cottage. Walking home, I passed a small art gallery hosting a reception. On impulse, I stepped inside. The space was filled with watercolor landscapes of the Ozarks, capturing the rolling hills and dense forests surrounding Eureka Springs. A small group of people mingled, holding wine glasses and discussing the artwork. "Do you paint?" A woman approximately my age approached, her silver hair styled in an elegant bob, colorful scarf draped around her neck. "I used to many years ago, just as a hobby. I haven't picked up a brush since my husband died." "I'm Dorothy Hanning," the woman extended her hand. "I teach a watercolor class for beginners, mostly retirees, at the community center on Wednesday mornings. You should join us." Another invitation, another opportunity. Without the weight of Jacob's expectations and needs, I found myself saying yes to things I might have previously declined out of obligation to be available. By week's end, my calendar contained commitments that were solely mine: library volunteering, watercolor class, a meeting of the Eureka Springs Garden Club that Ellen had invited me to attend. I'd established a new bank account at the local credit union, registered my address change with the post office, and found a doctor accepting new Medicare patients. The practical foundations of my new life were taking shape. Meanwhile, the cottage transformed daily. I'd ordered custom blinds for the living room windows, planted geraniums in pots on the front porch, and rearranged the furniture twice until the flow felt right. I spent hours in the garden learning the names of perennials Martha had planted, pulling early spring weeds, discovering volunteer seedlings pushing through the soil. The physical labor was satisfying, a tangible representation of the fresh start I'd created. Each sore muscle and dirt-caked fingernail connected me more deeply to this place I now called home. The response from Jacob's lawyer arrived exactly 2 weeks after my move. A brief note acknowledged receipt of Nolan's letter and the psychological evaluation stating that Mr. Collins has decided not to pursue further legal action at this time. No apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing, just a bloodless retreat. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it opened an unexpected well of sadness. The legal threat had kept Jacob present in my life, even as an adversary. Its withdrawal created a vacuum of finality to the rupture between us. For the first time, I allowed myself to fully feel what I'd lost, not just a house, but a relationship with my only child. That evening, sitting on my porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains, I wept quietly. Not from regret, I remained certain I'd made the right decision, but from grief for what should have been. A son who respected his mother's autonomy. A relationship built on mutual care rather than obligation and convenience. The tears ran their course, leaving behind a different kind of clarity. I couldn't control Jacob's choices or perceptions. I could only control my own life and how I responded to his actions. The boundary I'd established was necessary, even if painful. Sometimes love required distance to become healthy again. As April melded into May, I settled deeper into Eureka Springs life. The tourist season began in earnest, bringing weekend crowds to the winding streets and local shops. I discovered favorite walking routes that avoided the main thoroughfares, quiet coffee shops where locals gathered, and a farmer's market every Thursday featuring produce from surrounding farms. I kept my promise to Martha, hanging the hummingbird feeder on the east hook by the kitchen window. Just as she'd predicted, the tiny iridescent birds arrived in early May, their wings a blur as they hovered at the sugar water. I spent mornings watching them from my kitchen table, marveling at their territorial displays and aerial acrobatics. True to her word, Ellen proved to be a welcoming neighbor. She introduced me to her weekly bridge group, 4 women who'd been playing together for years, but gladly incorporated me as their 5th, allowing for rotation when someone couldn't attend. Through them, I met other neighbors and local business owners, gradually building a network of acquaintances. Dorothy's watercolor class became a Wednesday highlight. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed creative expression until I held a paintbrush again, watching colors blend on wet paper. My early attempts were amateurish, but Dorothy encouraged experimentation over perfection. The class of 8, all women over 60, bonded over shared frustrations and small triumphs. "You have a good eye for composition," Dorothy commented, studying my landscape attempt. "You frame things differently than most beginners. I used to photograph everything when Jacob was growing up," I explained. I suppose I developed a sense for what makes a balanced image. It was the first time I'd mentioned Jacob to anyone in Eureka Springs. Dorothy nodded without prying, sensing perhaps that there was more to the story than I was sharing. The library volunteering proved equally rewarding. Tuesday and Thursday mornings I read to circles of preschoolers whose rapt faces reminded me of Jacob at that age, hanging on every word of Goodnight Moon and Where the Wild Things Are. The memory brought bittersweet joy rather than pain, a reminder of the sweet boy who had existed before the entitled man emerged. Afternoons I helped teenagers navigate the complexities of college essays and scholarship applications. Their anxious anticipation of the future, their dreams and insecurities kept me connected to younger generations. I found myself offering the kind of patient guidance I wished someone had given Jacob during his turbulent high school years. One Tuesday in late May, I returned home from story hour to find a package on my porch. No return address, just my name and new address printed in neat block letters. Inside was a small wooden jewelry box I recognized immediately. I'd kept it on my dresser in the Fayetteville house, using it for earrings and pins. I must have overlooked it in the rush to pack essential items. A note was tucked inside. "Found this while cleaning. Thought you might want it. Melissa, no mention of Jacob, no update on the children, no questions about my welfare, just a simple acknowledgement of a forgotten possession." Still, it was the first contact that wasn't accusatory or demanding. I ran my fingers over the carved lid, wondering if this represented Melissa's private olive branch or merely an obligation fulfilled. I called Evelyn that evening to tell her about the package. "It's probably Melissa's way of keeping a door cracked open," she suggested. "She's caught between loyalty to Jacob and recognizing that he overstepped." The jewelry box sat on my new dresser, a small bridge between past and present. I decided to take it as a positive sign, however tentative. May blended into June with increasing warmth and humidity. The cottage, situated on a hillside with mature shade trees, remained relatively cool, though I installed window air conditioning units in the bedroom and living room for the inevitable July heat. The garden flourished with black-eyed Susans and coneflowers attracting butterflies and bees. I added pots of herbs on the kitchen windowsill, basil, thyme, rosemary, finding satisfaction in cooking with ingredients I'd grown. My 72nd birthday arrived on June 10th. Evelyn drove up from Fayetteville, bringing a lemon cake from my favorite bakery and a set of wind chimes for the front porch. Ellen organized a small surprise gathering of neighbors and my bridge group, filling the cottage with laughter and conversation. Dorothy gave me a set of professional watercolors, and Patricia from the library presented a gift card from the staff. "Make sure to treat yourself to something impractical," Patricia insisted. "Books don't count, they're necessities." The celebration felt genuine and warm, unmarred by the tension that had characterized family birthdays in recent years. No one was performing obligatory rituals or checking the time, anxious to leave. These people had chosen to celebrate me not out of duty, but out of emerging friendship. Missing, of course, was any acknowledgement from Jacob. I'd received a text message from Melissa that morning. "Happy birthday. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Love from all of us, but nothing directly from my son." The omission stung but didn't surprise me. Jacob's pride had always been his most consistent trait. The day after my birthday, I decided to tackle a project I'd been postponing, sorting through old photographs. I'd brought several albums and loose photos from Fayetteville, intending to organize them chronologically. Sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, I spread decades of memories around me: Jacob's childhood vacations with Walter, my parents, old friends, celebrations, and ordinary moments preserved in fading color. There was Jacob at 5, proudly displaying a gap-toothed smile on his first day of kindergarten. Jacob at 12, holding a trophy from the science fair. Jacob at 18, awkward in his graduation gown, already impatient to begin the next phase of life. Jacob at 30, holding his newborn daughter Emma, looking terrified and elated simultaneously. The images told a story of connection that contradicted the recent rupture. I'd been a good mother, present, supportive, loving. Jacob had been a normal child, sometimes sweet, sometimes difficult, gradually developing his own personality and priorities. Where had the relationship gone so wrong? When had mutual respect eroded into his assumption that my needs were subordinate to his? Perhaps it had been after Walter died, when grief made me temporarily vulnerable and dependent. Perhaps it was during Jacob's divorce, when my unconditional support reinforced his sense of entitlement. Or perhaps it had been building gradually through hundreds of small interactions where I'd prioritized his convenience over my boundaries. Whatever the origin, the pattern had calcified into expectation. By selling the house, I hadn't just removed a physical space. I'd demolished a psychological structure that had defined our relationship for decades. As I sorted photos into new albums, I made a conscious decision to preserve the positive memories while acknowledging the difficult reality. I wouldn't erase Jacob from my narrative or pretend the estrangement didn't hurt. Neither would I allow that pain to define my new chapter or make me question my right to self-determination. June gave way to July, bringing the full tourist season to Eureka Springs. The town swelled with visitors on weekends, creating lines at restaurants and filling the narrow streets with unfamiliar faces. I discovered the rhythm of a tourist town, which days to avoid downtown, which early morning hours allowed for peaceful walks before the crowds emerged, which local spots remained relatively undiscovered by visitors. The 4th of July brought fireworks over the valley, visible from my front porch, where I sat with Ellen and several neighbors, drinking homemade lemonade and watching the colorful explosions echo between the hills. The celebration reminded me of Fayetteville's annual display, which Jacob's family had often watched from my backyard, the children squealing with delight at each burst of light. The memory prompted a moment of melancholy. Emma and David, 9 and 7 now, were growing up fast. Would they remember their grandmother, or would I become a vague figure from early childhood, gradually fading from their recollections? The thought was unbearable. The following morning, I made a decision. I would reach out to Melissa directly about seeing the children. Jacob might rebuff contact, but Melissa's birthday text suggested she might be open to some form of connection. I composed a careful email, keeping my request simple and non-confrontational. "Dear Melissa, I hope this finds you and the children well. I've been thinking of Emma and David often and would love to see them if possible. Perhaps they could visit for an afternoon, or we could meet at a park or restaurant if that's more comfortable. Eureka Springs has lovely child-friendly activities in the summer. Please let me know if this might be possible. With love, Maggie." I hesitated before pressing send, uncertain whether this olive branch would be accepted or rejected. Then I remembered Martha's words about the hummingbirds. They returned to the same spots year after year. Some connections persisted despite changes in circumstance. I had to trust that the bond with my grandchildren might be one of them. Melissa's reply came the next day, her tone cautiously positive. "Maggie, thank you for your email. The kids have been asking about you. Jacob is still processing everything, but I think a visit would be good for everyone. How about this Sunday I could bring them up for the afternoon? There's a train excursion through the Ozarks that I know they'd enjoy." Melissa. My heart leapt at this unexpected opening. A chance to reconnect with the children without the weight of Jacob's disapproval hanging over the interaction. I replied immediately, confirming the plan and suggesting we meet at the historic train station. The days until Sunday crawled by with agonizing slowness. I cleaned the cottage thoroughly baked chocolate chip cookies, Emma's favorite, and bought colored pencils and sketchbooks in case the children wanted to draw. I researched the train schedule and purchased tickets in advance, planning every detail to ensure a smooth visit. Sunday morning dawned clear and warm. I dressed carefully in a lightweight blue dress, casual enough for a train ride, but nice enough to make an impression. It had been nearly 3 months since I'd seen the children. Would they be shy? Resentful, excited, I prepared myself for any reaction, determined to make the visit positive regardless. The train station, a restored Victorian structure near downtown, bustled with tourists when I arrived at 11:30. I scanned the crowd nervously, finally spotting Melissa's red SUV pulling into the parking lot. My heart pounded as I watched the vehicle doors open. Emma emerged first, her blonde hair, longer than I remembered, pulled back in a neat ponytail. David followed, clutching a small backpack shaped like a dinosaur. Then Melissa's sunglasses perched on her head, looking around uncertainly. I raised my hand, waving to catch their attention. Emma saw me first, her face lighting up with recognition. "Grandma," she shouted, breaking into a run across the parking lot. The genuine joy in her voice dissolved my anxiety. I knelt to receive her hug, feeling her thin arms wrapped tightly around my neck. David approached more cautiously, hanging back until Emma released me. "Hi, Grandma," he mumbled, studying his shoes. I didn't push for physical contact, respecting his reserve. "Hello, David. I'm so happy to see you. I hear we're taking a train ride today." He nodded, a flicker of interest crossing his face. "Dad said trains are boring, but Mom says this one goes through tunnels and over big bridges." The mention of Jacob sent a jolt through me, but I maintained my smile. "Well, I think it sounds exciting. Shall we find our seats?" Melissa approached as the children moved toward the station, keeping a slight distance that felt deliberate. "Hi, Maggie. You're looking well?" The kids have been counting down the days. "Thank you for bringing them," I replied, genuine gratitude in my voice. "How are you holding up?" A shadow crossed her face. "It's been complicated. Jacob has his perspective, I have mine. The important thing is the children shouldn't be caught in the middle." I agree completely. We left it at that, an unspoken acknowledgement that today wasn't for rehashing adult conflicts. It was for rebuilding connections with innocent parties who deserved relationships with both their parents and their grandmother. The train ride exceeded expectations. The vintage cars, restored to 1920s elegance, delighted the children. Emma pressed her face to the window as we chugged through tunnels carved into the Ozark Mountains, while David kept a meticulous list of wildlife spotted along the route. Melissa relaxed visibly as the afternoon progressed, her initial wariness giving way to genuine conversation. When we returned to the station 3 hours later, I invited them to see my cottage. To my surprise, Melissa agreed readily. "We have time before we need to head back," she said. "The kids have been curious about where you live now." The cottage passed inspection with flying colors. Emma exclaimed over the window seat filled with pillows, a perfect reading nook, while David was captivated by the hummingbirds at the kitchen feeder. Melissa walked through, quietly taking in details with thoughtful eyes. "It suits you," she commented as the children explored the backyard. "It's peaceful, but not isolated." "I feel at home here," I admitted. I didn't expect to settle in so quickly. A moment of hesitation, then "Jacob doesn't know we came today." The admission didn't surprise me. I suspected this visit represented Melissa's independent judgment about what the children needed, regardless of Jacob's feelings. "That's between you and him," I replied carefully. "I'm just grateful for the time with Emma and David." "He's still angry," she continued, lowering her voice to ensure the children couldn't hear from the yard. "But he's also confused. He truly believed he was doing the right thing, offering you security in your old age. He can't understand why you'd rather live alone than with family." Because living with family on their terms isn't security, it's surrender, I thought, but didn't say. Instead, Jacob and I have different ideas about what I need at this stage of life. Perhaps someday we'll find middle ground. Melissa nodded, seeming to accept this diplomatic answer. The children burst back inside, full of excitement about a rabbit they'd spotted near the garden. "Can we come back soon?" Emma asked as they prepared to leave, her eyes hopeful. "Maybe for a sleepover." My heart constricted with love and longing. "I'd like that very much." "We'll have to see what your parents think." "I'll bring them again," Melissa promised quietly as the children climbed into the SUV. "Give Jacob time. He's stubborn, but he's not heartless." I waved until the red vehicle disappeared around the corner, then returned to my suddenly empty cottage. The silence felt different now, not peaceful but hollow, echoing with the children's departed voices. For the first time since moving, I questioned my decision. Had I sacrificed too much for independence? Was living alone worth the price of limited access to those I loved? The doubt lingered through dinner, accompanying me as I washed dishes and prepared for bed. Then, as I was turning out lights, my phone chimed with a text message from Melissa. Emma wants to know if next Sunday works for you too. She's already planning what books to bring. Relief flooded through me, washing away the uncertainty. One visit had become two. A connection had been maintained, perhaps even strengthened by its new parameters. Independence hadn't cost me my grandchildren. It had simply changed the nature of our relationship. I fell asleep that night with renewed conviction. The path I'd chosen was challenging, but right not just for me, but potentially for all involved. True family connections couldn't be forced or presumed. They had to be built on mutual respect and genuine desire for each other's company. The cottage settled around me, creaking gently as houses do at night. Outside, an owl called from the nearby woods, its voice carrying through the open window. Inside, I dreamed of train rides and children's laughter of bridges being rebuilt one careful step at a time. Sunday visits with Emma and David became the anchoring points of my summer calendar. Each week, Melissa would drive them to Eureka Springs, sometimes staying herself, other times leaving them for a few hours while she ran errands or enjoyed quiet time alone. The children gradually relaxed into a new routine, with me bringing books and toys, requesting favorite meals, leaving toothbrushes in my bathroom drawer. Small tendrils of normalcy taking root in changed soil. July melted into August with relentless heat. The cottage's window units strained against 90-degree days, but evenings brought relief on the porch where I sat with iced tea, watching fireflies rise from the grass like earthbound stars. My garden thrived despite the temperature, the perennials Martha had planted proving themselves drought-resistant. I added my own touches. Wind chimes hanging from the oak tree, solar lights lining the front path, a bird bath nestled among black-eyed Susans. The library expanded my volunteer hours as summer reading programs peaked. I found myself surrounded by children 3 days a week, reading stories, supervising craft projects, helping with scavenger hunts through the stacks. Their energy invigorated rather than exhausted me. Among them, I was Maggie the library lady, not someone's mother or widow or unwanted burden. Dorothy's watercolor class continued through summer. My skills improved enough that she suggested I submit a painting to the community art show in September. It's not about winning ribbons, she insisted. It's about declaring yourself part of this community's creative circle. I chose to paint the view from my front porch, the street curving down the hill, Victorian houses nestled among mature trees, mountains rising in the distance. The scene represented my new perspective both literally and figuratively. Dorothy helped me mat and frame it properly, treating my amateur effort with professional respect. My network of friends expanded organically. Ellen's Bridge Group led to an invitation to join the Historical Society, which maintained several Victorian homes as museums. I began volunteering as a docent one Saturday a month, learning the town's colorful history to share with tourists. The work connected me to Eureka Springs in a deeper way, making me feel less like a newcomer and more like a temporary caretaker of ongoing traditions. Through it all, Jacob remained a conspicuous absence. When the children visited, they mentioned him casually. Dad built a treehouse. Dad took us fishing. Dad bought a new truck, but never in connection to me. Melissa offered occasional updates, always careful and neutral. Jacob's doing well at work. He's coaching David's baseball team. He's thinking about going back to school for a master's degree. I absorbed these fragments, hungrily piecing together a mosaic of the life continuing without me. Sometimes I'd catch myself reaching for the phone to share news with him, a funny story from the library, a particularly beautiful sunset. Emma's excitement about starting 4th grade before remembering the wall between us. The impulse to connect never fully disappeared, though it weakened with time. In late August, Evelyn called with unexpected news Jacob had contacted her. He just showed up at my house yesterday evening, she explained, her voice measured. Said he wanted to talk about you but didn't know how to reach out directly. My heart stuttered. After 4 months of silence, why now? What had changed? What did he want? I managed to ask, gripping the phone tightly. To know how you're doing, whether you're managing on your own. He seemed genuinely concerned, not hostile. I gave him minimal information, told him you're thriving, making friends, keeping busy. I didn't mention the children's visits since I wasn't sure if he knew. I sank onto the couch processing this development. Jacob reaching out even indirectly represented a significant shift. Was it genuine concern or merely information gathering? Had Melissa's continued facilitation of the children's visits finally worn down his resistance? Did he say anything else? I pressed, needing more to interpret this olive branch. He asked if I thought you'd accept a call from him. I said I couldn't speak for you, but that you've never been one to hold grudges. Then he thanked me and left. The whole conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. I sat with this information for several days, examining it from all angles like a curious object found on a beach. Part of me yearned to rebuild the bridge immediately, to call Jacob and dissolve the estrangement with maternal forgiveness. A wiser part recognized that easy reconciliation might simply reset our dysfunctional patterns rather than establishing healthier ones. When Melissa brought the children that Sunday, I mentioned Jacob's visit to Evelyn, casually watching her reaction. He's been different lately, she acknowledged, her eyes following the children playing in the backyard. More reflective, less reactive. The kids notice it too. Different how? She considered her words carefully. He started admitting when he's wrong. Small things at first, apologizing for being late, acknowledging when he's overreacted to something. Last week, he actually thanked me for bringing the kids to see you. Said it was good for them to maintain the relationship. The admission startled me. Jacob, who had contested the house sale and accused me of mental incompetence, now tacitly approving his children's regular visits. It seemed too significant a change to be coincidental. I think seeing you manage so well on your own has forced him to reconsider some assumptions, Melissa continued. Plus, the kids come back from these visits full of stories about your life here. It's hard to maintain the narrative that you're a vulnerable old woman who needs protection when Emma's telling him about you teaching her to play bridge or volunteering at the library. The thought of my grandchildren as unknowing ambassadors brought a smile. Their innocent reports had accomplished what legal documents and formal statements couldn't, humanizing me in Jacob's eyes as a person with agency and capability rather than a problem to be managed. Do you think he's ready to talk directly? I asked the question that had circled my mind for days, finally finding voice. Melissa didn't rush to answer a hesitation that spoke to her desire for honesty over easy reassurance. I think he wants to be. Whether he's ready to hear what you need to say is another matter. Jacob's never been good at confronting his own behavior. A truth I knew all too well. My son could acknowledge external factors affecting a situation, the economy, other people's actions, unforeseen circumstances, but rarely his own contribution to problems. This blind spot had characterized our relationship for decades. Tell him I'm open to a conversation when he's ready, I decided. No pressure, no timeline. The ball is in his court. September arrived with cooling temperatures and shifting light. The tourist crowds thinned after Labor Day, leaving Eureka Springs to those who appreciated the quieter shoulder season. My cottage garden produced a late flush of zinnias and dahlias, their bright heads nodding in autumn breezes. I planted chrysanthemums in pots on the porch steps, their bronze and burgundy blooms signaling seasonal change. The community art show opened the second weekend of September, featuring local work displayed in the historic auditorium. My watercolor hung among dozens of others, most far more accomplished. Still, seeing my name on the small identification card beside it filled me with quiet pride. I'd created something new, put it into the world, and opened myself to both appreciation and criticism, a small act of courage. Dorothy insisted on taking a photograph of me standing beside the painting, documenting the moment for posterity. I'll frame it for you, she promised. Every artist should have a picture of their first exhibition. The following week brought unexpected communication and email from Jacob himself, the first direct contact since our confrontation in April. The message was brief. Mom, I've been thinking about you and wondering how you're doing. Melissa says you've settled well in Eureka Springs. I'm glad to hear it. I know things ended badly between us, and I've been trying to understand my part in that. If you're open to it, I'd like to talk. No pressure. Jacob, no pressure. The same words I'd used when sending my message through Melissa. Perhaps we were both approaching this tentative reconnection with the same caution, aware of the fragility of what might be rebuilt. I composed several responses before settling on one equally brief. Jacob, thank you for reaching out. I'm doing very well here, and have created a life that suits me perfectly. I would welcome a conversation when you feel ready. Perhaps a phone call to start. You can reach me at this email or on my cell. Love, Mom. I added love, Mom, after some consideration. Despite everything, it remained true. The love had never vanished, only been overshadowed by hurt and disappointment. Acknowledging its continued existence seemed important, a foundation upon which other emotions might be processed. 2 days passed without response long enough that I began to wonder if he'd reconsidered. Then my phone rang on Thursday evening, an unknown number appearing on the screen. I answered with trepidation. "Mom, it's Jacob." His voice sounded different, hesitant, lacking the confidence that typically bordered on arrogance. I sat on the window seat, drawing a deep breath to steady myself. "Hello, Jacob. I'm glad you called." An awkward pause followed, neither of us quite knowing how to navigate this new territory. I waited, giving him space to direct the conversation he'd initiated. "Melissa says you've got a nice place up there. Smaller than the old house, but with character. Small talk, safe, non-confrontational." I followed his lead. "It's perfect for me. 2 bedrooms, a lovely front porch garden space in back. The previous owner was a librarian who kept everything immaculate. That sounds like a good fit." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear him gathering courage for something more substantial. "Look, Mom, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past months. About what happened with the house, the things I said and did. I didn't handle it well. An understatement, but an acknowledgement nonetheless. I kept my response measured, neither dismissing his effort nor making it too easy. "No, you didn't, but I appreciate you recognizing that. I was angry," he continued, words coming faster now. I felt blindsided. "We had this whole plan worked out. Melissa's mom needed care. We needed more space. It seemed like the perfect solution for everyone. Then suddenly you'd sold the house and were gone. It felt like you'd chosen being alone over being with family." There it was, the heart of his hurt and confusion. To Jacob, my choice represented rejection rather than self-preservation. I considered my response carefully, knowing this moment might determine whether healing was possible. I didn't choose to be alone over being with family, Jacob. I chose to make my own decisions rather than have them made for me. There's a crucial difference. You didn't ask if I wanted you all to move in, you announced it as a decision already made. You divided up my home without consulting me. That's not family supporting each other. That's one person imposing their will on another. Silence stretched between us, tense with unspoken emotions. When Jacob spoke again, his voice had tightened. "I thought I was helping. You're getting older, living alone, I was worried about you." The familiar justification. I'd anticipated it, but wouldn't let it stand unchallenged. Being concerned about someone doesn't give you the right to take over their life, Jacob. If you were genuinely worried, you could have asked what support I needed, what my plans were for the future. Instead, you decided what was best for me based on your own convenience. That's not fair. It wasn't just about convenience. Wasn't it? I pressed gently. Your house was too small for Melissa's mother to move in. You needed more space for the kids. My house solved your problems, and you justified taking it by convincing yourself it was for my benefit, too. Another long pause. I could almost see him struggling with the characterization, wanting to reject it, but finding uncomfortable truth within it. Maybe there was some of that, he finally admitted. "But I do worry about you, Mom. Dad made me promise to look after you when he was dying." This revelation struck me with unexpected force. Walter extracting a deathbed promise from our teenage son, a well-intentioned but ultimately damaging request that had shaped Jacob's sense of responsibility toward me for decades. "Your father shouldn't have placed that burden on you," I said softly. "He was trying to protect me, but he inadvertently set a pattern where you felt responsible for my well-being rather than respecting my autonomy. I'm sorry you've carried that weight." A sharp intake of breath suggested the observation had hit home. "I never thought of it that way," Jacob murmured. "It always just seemed like what a good son should do. A good son respects his mother as a complete person with her own mind and rights, supports her choices even when they're different from what he would choose, asks what she needs instead of assuming he knows." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, circling through past hurts and misunderstandings, examining the patterns that had led to our breaking point. Jacob didn't fully concede every point, nor did I expect him to. Decades of entrenched behavior couldn't be dismantled in a single phone call, but he listened in a way he hadn't before, interrupting less, considering my perspective with newfound willingness. As we prepared to end the call, Jacob cleared his throat awkwardly. "The kids keep asking when they can stay overnight with you. Would that be okay sometime? Maybe I could drive them up." The tentative offer hung between us. Not quite an olive branch, more a slender green shoot pushing through cracked concrete. I recognized it for the significant gesture it was. "I'd love that, Jacob. They're welcome any time. And so are you if you'd like to see where I'm living now. Maybe next weekend Saturday I could bring them up around lunchtime, help them get settled, then leave them with you until Sunday afternoon." The careful parameters helping them settle, leaving them with me returning the next day, created a controlled environment for our first face-to-face meeting since April. Jacob was setting boundaries of his own, limiting exposure while opening a door to reconnection. That sounds perfect. After hanging up, I sat in the growing twilight, processing the conversation's unexpected turns. Jacob's acknowledgement of his behavior, while incomplete, represented significant growth. The revelation about Walter's deathbed request explained much about Jacob's sense of entitlement regarding my care, a misguided attempt to fulfill a promise made when he was too young to understand its implications. For the first time, I felt genuine hope for a rebuilt relationship, not returning to old patterns, but creating something healthier with clearer boundaries and mutual respect. The process would be slow, the road uneven, but the journey had begun. The next morning, I called Evelyn to share the development. Her delight echoed through the phone. "I knew that boy would come around eventually," she crowed. "He's stubborn like his father, but not heartless." "We'll see," I cautioned, unwilling to assume complete transformation from one conversation. "But it's a start." The days leading up to Saturday buzzed with anticipation and anxiety. I prepared the guest bedroom meticulously, adding cheerful throw pillows and placing favorite books on the nightstand. I stocked the refrigerator with foods the children enjoyed, planned activities for different weather possibilities, and generally fretted like a new grandmother rather than an experienced one. Dorothy noticed my distraction during Wednesday's watercolor class. "Big weekend coming up?" she asked as we cleaned brushes afterwards. I'd mentioned Jacob to her only in passing, never delving into the full complexity of our estrangement. Now I found myself explaining the situation, the confrontation over the house, the months of silence, the tentative reconciliation beginning. She listened attentively, nodding at points that resonated with her own experience. "My daughter and I didn't speak for 3 years after my divorce," she confided when I finished. She sided completely with her father, blamed me for destroying the family. It took time for her to see that relationships are complex, that parents are people with their own needs and rights. Now we're closer than ever, but we had to rebuild on a completely different foundation. Her understanding comforted me. I wasn't alone in navigating the difficult terrain of adult parent-child relationships gone awry. Saturday arrived with perfect early fall weather, crisp morning yielding to warm afternoon, the sky an intense blue against turning leaves. I watched the clock anxiously until precisely 12:15 when a dark blue pickup truck I didn't recognize turned onto my street. Jacob had mentioned trading in his old truck, but seeing the tangible evidence of changes in his life I hadn't witnessed struck me with unexpected force. The truck parked in front of my cottage. Emma and David tumbled out first, racing up the front walk with overnight bags bouncing against their backs. Jacob emerged more slowly, surveying the cottage and garden before approaching. He looked thinner than I remembered his face, more angular hair, shorter. 5 months had changed us both. I greeted the children with hugs on the porch, then turned to face my son. The moment stretched between us, loaded with unspoken emotions. Then Jacob stepped forward awkwardly, extending his hand as if for a formal shake. I ignored it, opening my arms instead. After a moment's hesitation, he moved into the embrace. The hug was brief and somewhat stiff, but it represented more than I dared hope for physical acknowledgement of our connection despite the pain between us. When we separated, Jacob's eyes were suspiciously bright. "Nice place, Mom," he managed, glancing around at the cottage and garden. "It suits you." "Thank you. I'm very happy here." The children, oblivious to the emotional undercurrents, had already disappeared inside to explore. Their excited voices filtered through the screen door, exclaiming over changes since their last visit. New curtains in the guest room, a birdhouse outside the kitchen window, books added to the shelves. Their enthusiasm broke the tension. Jacob smiled faintly, some of the stiffness leaving his shoulders. "They've been counting down the days." David packed his bag on Tuesday. "I've been looking forward to it, too." We moved inside, where I offered coffee and showed Jacob around the cottage. He commented appropriately on each room, noting the personal touches I'd added, asking questions about the neighborhood and town. The conversation remained superficial, but comfortable, both of us carefully avoiding potential trigger topics. After lunch, Jacob helped carry the children's overnight bags to the guest room, then checked his watch with obvious reluctance. "I should probably get going. Let you all start your weekend." The children protested immediately, begging him to stay longer, show him the train station, the park, the ice cream shop downtown. I watched Jacob's face soften at their pleas, his eyes meeting mine with unspoken question. "You're welcome to stay for dinner," I offered. "We could all walk downtown, get ice cream afterwards. Only if you'd like to, of course." The invitation hung between us, not pushing, not demanding, leaving space for his choice. Jacob hesitated, clearly weighing competing impulses. That would be nice, actually, if you're sure it's not imposing. Not at all. I'd enjoy the company. The afternoon unfolded with unexpected ease. We walked to the historic downtown area, the children running ahead, then doubling back, pointing out landmarks they remembered from previous visits. Jacob and I maintained conversation about safe topics, his work at the engineering firm, my volunteer activities at the library, Emma's new teacher, David's baseball team. Gradually, as physical movement loosened psychological constraints, our dialogue deepened. Jacob mentioned the therapy he'd started after our confrontation, initially to prove he was right, but eventually recognizing patterns that needed addressing. Dad was the same way, thinking he always knew best, refusing to admit when he was wrong. I commented as we climbed the steep street back toward my cottage. You learned from his example. Jacob nodded, accepting the observation without defensiveness. I've been working on that. Trying to listen more, assume less. Melissa says she's noticed a difference. The acknowledgement of his efforts to change moved me deeply. By dinner, the awkwardness had largely dissipated, replaced by a tentative but genuine connection. We ate on the front porch, watching twilight settle over the neighborhood. The children's chatter filled silences that might otherwise have been uncomfortable. After putting Emma and David to bed, an elaborate routine involving stories, water requests, and monster checks under the bed, I returned to the porch where Jacob sat watching fireflies rise from the darkening yard. I settled into the adjacent rocker, the familiar creak of wood against wood, soothing in its predictability. I should get going, Jacob said without moving. Let you get some rest before they wake you at dawn. You're welcome to stay too, I offered impulsively. The couch pulls out into a bed. Save you driving back in the dark and returning tomorrow. He considered the offer, clearly torn between the desire to extend this unexpectedly pleasant day and the safety of retreat to process the experience. Thanks, but I'd better head back tonight. Melissa's expecting me. Maybe next time. Next time. The casual reference to future visits affirmed that today represented a beginning rather than an isolated event. I nodded, accepting his decision without pressing. They have a library program at 10 tomorrow morning they're excited about, I mentioned. If you come around noon, we should be back. Sounds good. Jacob stood stretching slightly. In the porch light, I noticed new lines around his eyes, a sprinkling of gray at his temples I hadn't seen before. My son was aging into middle life, carrying his own burdens, facing his own mortality. The realization softened something that had remained hard within me. I'm glad you came today, Jacob. It meant a lot to the children. And to me. He nodded, emotion flickering across his face too quickly to interpret. I've missed you, Mom. Even when I was angriest, I missed you. The simple admission broke through the last of my reserve. I reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. I've missed you too. Always. We stood there a moment longer, the contact saying what words couldn't fully express. Then Jacob descended the porch steps, turning back once to wave before disappearing into his truck. The engine-started headlights swept across the garden, and he was gone, returning to his own life, his own home, his own struggles and joys. I remained on the porch long after the sound of his truck faded, listening to night insects and distant wind chimes. The visit had gone better than I dared hope, laying groundwork for a new relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. It wouldn't be perfect or immediate. Too much had happened for complete restoration in a single day. But the foundation was solid. The next morning brought excited children at dawn, as Jacob had predicted. We made pancakes shaped like animals, played board games, until it was time for the library program, then walked downtown in the warm September sunshine. The children chattered about seeing their father later, their easy acceptance of the new arrangement touching in its simplicity. To them, having both grandmother and father in their lives was natural and right, regardless of adult complications. Jacob arrived promptly at noon, looking more relaxed than the previous day. He accepted the lunch invitation without hesitation, and conversation flowed more easily around the kitchen table. When it came time for them to leave, goodbyes were exchanged with genuine warmth. We'll do this again soon, Jacob asked, the question directed at both me and the children. Yes, please, Emma responded immediately. Next time, Grandma said we can make cookies and take them to the neighbors. Jacob's eyebrows rose slightly at this evidence of my community integration. Well, then we definitely can't miss Cookie Delivery Day. The following weeks established a new pattern. Jacob brought the children every other weekend, sometimes staying for meals or activities, other times dropping them off and returning later. Our conversations gradually expanded to include more difficult topics: his financial struggles that had motivated the house takeover attempt, my feelings of being undervalued and infantilized, the grief we'd both carried since Walter's death. Each discussion cleared another layer of misunderstanding, though not without occasional tension. Jacob still struggled to fully accept my perspective on certain points, particularly regarding his intentions versus the impact of his actions. I sometimes found myself slipping into old patterns of placating rather than standing firm on boundaries. The process wasn't linear or perfect, but it moved steadily forward. In early October, Jacob arrived alone one Saturday morning. No children, no overnight bags, just my son on my doorstep with an uncertain expression. "I thought maybe we could talk just the two of us," he explained as I invited him in. Really talk without distractions. We settled in the living room, morning sunlight streaming through windows that faced the mountains. Jacob declined coffee, sitting forward on the edge of the couch, hands clasped between his knees. "I've been trying to understand why I reacted so strongly to you selling the house," he began without preamble. "My therapist thinks it wasn't really about the house itself." I waited, allowing him space to continue this journey of self-reflection. "When Dad was dying, he called me into his hospital room alone that last week. I was 17, terrified of losing him. He made me promise to take care of you, to make sure you were never alone or struggling. I swore I would. It felt like the last thing I could do for him, keep that promise." Jacob's voice caught slightly, the memory still raw despite the decades between. "Every time I've intervened in your life, offering financial advice, suggesting you downsize, finally planning to move in, I've told myself it was fulfilling that promise, protecting you the way Dad wanted. But I see now it was more complicated than that." He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. "The house represented Dad to me. The life you built together, the place where he lived and died. When you sold it so easily, it felt like you were discarding not just the building, but his memory. Like you were rejecting the protection I thought was my responsibility to provide." The admission stunned me with its raw honesty and insight. Jacob had never spoken so openly about his feelings regarding Walter's death, or his sense of obligation afterward. This newfound self-awareness represented profound growth. "Your father would never have wanted his memory preserved at the expense of my autonomy," I said gently. "He wouldn't have wanted you burdened with responsibility for my welfare in ways that created resentment or control. The promise he extracted was unfair to both of us." Jacob nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that. Dad wasn't perfect. He loved us, but he made mistakes too. Putting that weight on me was one of them, and my allowing the pattern to continue for decades was my mistake, I acknowledged. I should have established clearer boundaries long ago instead of waiting until I felt cornered." We talked for hours, delving into decades of misunderstandings and unmet expectations. Unlike our previous conversations, this one reached deeper, examining root causes rather than symptoms. Jacob revealed vulnerabilities I'd never recognized, how Walter's early death had left him feeling inadequate as a man, constantly striving to measure up to an idealized memory. I shared my own struggles with identity after becoming a widow, the challenge of reconstructing a life without the partnership that had defined me for so long. By afternoon, something fundamental had shifted between us. The anger and hurt hadn't disappeared entirely, but they'd been contextualized within a larger understanding of our shared history and separate journeys. We'd seen each other more clearly, not as the roles we occupied, but as complex individuals with legitimate needs and perspectives. As Jacob prepared to leave, he paused on the porch, looking out at the garden where autumn flowers nodded in the breeze. "I like knowing you're happy here, Mom, that you've built something that's truly yours." The acknowledgement, simple but profound, represented everything I'd fought for. Not just independence, but recognition of my right to define happiness on my own terms. "Thank you, Jacob. That means more than you know." He hesitated, then added, "Dad would be proud of you. The real you, not the version he thought needed protecting." Tears sprang unexpectedly to my eyes. I think he'd be proud of both of us, for finding our way back to each other even after everything. Jacob nodded, emotion tightening his features. He hugged me briefly before descending the porch steps, turning back once to wave before driving away. I remained on the porch long after his truck disappeared, watching sunlight shift across the garden as afternoon mellowed toward evening. The cottage settled around me, solid and welcoming, a space I'd created for myself, not inherited or been granted. From inside came the familiar sounds of an aging house, the tick of expanding wood, the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the whisper of air through century-old windows. This place was mine, earned through courage and conviction. The life I was building here belonged to me alone, shaped by choices made freely rather than obligations accepted passively. And yet, paradoxically, that very independence had created space for genuine connection with Jacob, with the grandchildren, with new friends and neighbors. As twilight descended, I moved inside, closing the door against the autumn chill. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and joys. A watercolor class library, volunteering planning the grandchildren's next visit. Tonight brought peaceful solitude, the quiet companionship of my own thoughts and memories. I made a simple dinner, eating by candlelight at the kitchen table, while watching the last hummingbird of the season visit the feeder outside my window. Soon it would journey south for winter, following ancient instincts toward warmth and sustenance. In spring it might return, or perhaps different birds would find the feeder establishing new patterns in this space I now called home. Either way, I would be here watching from my window, living the life I'd chosen, rather than the one others had prescribed. The thought filled me with profound contentment, not the passive acceptance often attributed to age, but the hard-won serenity of a woman who had finally claimed her rightful place in the world. Before bed, I stood at the cottage window, gazing at stars emerging above the Ozark Mountains. The sky seemed vaster here than in Fayetteville, the celestial patterns more pronounced against the rural darkness. I thought of all the women throughout history who had fought similar battles for autonomy, some succeeding many, failing, all contributing to a slow evolution of understanding about female agency across the lifespan. My small victory was part of that continuum, unremarkable, perhaps in the grand scheme, but monumentally important in my personal universe. I had refused diminishment. I had insisted on recognition. I had reclaimed the authorship of my own story. I closed the curtains, moving through my nighttime routine with practiced ease. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges and rewards. Tonight I would sleep soundly in this house, built with my courage and conviction, a home defined not by its walls and roof, but by the freedom it represented. Peace isn't a gift someone gives you, I whispered to the quiet room. It's the house you build after everyone else has stopped telling you how to live. And for the first time in 72 years, I knew exactly what that peace felt like: warm coffee, clean air, and a door that only opened when I chose to open it.